The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and give it just a few seconds to let everybody get dialed in. We've got a big crowd joining us, so just sit tight, and we'll get started in just a few seconds. Good morning, and welcome to today's webinar, Got Growth. I'm Brian Pettiville, Chairman of the IIABCal Emerging Leaders Committee, and with me today is Cheryl Koch, President and CEO of Agency Management Resource Group. Cheryl has served in nearly every capacity in an independent agency, having been an account manager, producer, and agency owner. She now devotes her time to agency management, consulting, and training, and speaking at industry functions throughout the country. Cheryl currently consults on marketing and sales, sales management, agency operations, automation, and strategic planning through her Roseville, California company. For today's webinar, we've muted all your phones to eliminate any background noise. However, you can ask questions throughout the webinar in writing through the right-hand navigation area of the Go-To Meetings. All your questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, so go ahead and feel free to enter those in, and we'll keep an eye on those and get those to Cheryl so she can answer them for you. With that, I'd like to introduce Cheryl. Take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone, or as we like to say for those of us who are here in New Jersey, good afternoon. This is part 2 of a 3-part series that we're doing on current management challenges that face independent insurance agencies. As Brian said, today our topic is Got Growth. We're going to focus on a very critical issue of creating the organic growth that is going to be necessary for us to sustain our independent agencies on into the future, something that is very much discussed and not necessarily a lot of solutions being offered out there. We're using as our framework for this the Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of America Best Practices Study. And we're going to use some of the data, some of the statistics that are revealed in the study. If you're not familiar with how the Best Practices Study works, there are about 300 agencies that were selected across the country. About 1,200 applied to be in the study, about 300 made the cut. And they entered the study in 2010, and then they stay in the group for 3 years. So the 2011 and 2012 updates to the study are the same group of independent agents. We're working off the 2012 information, so it's really kind of the end for that group, and then a new group is going to start in 2013. So we're examining them over time to talk about obviously that the critical issues have changed in that 3-year period of time, and the data has changed in the 3-year period of time. That's what we're going to be using as our framework. If you are interested in obtaining a copy of the Best Practices Study, you would go to IIABA.net, the national big I, which you use, I believe, your IIABCal login in order to get there. And if you're going to obtain the Best Practices Study, make sure if you get the 2012 update that you also go back and purchase the 2010 study. That's where a lot of the information originated in this particular seminar. So this is going to be a little bit like speed dating this morning. We don't have a lot of time to delve into these issues deeply. This is really meant to entice you to come and get more information at InsureFest, where we will have the opportunity to spend some more time talking about individual strategies and some of the information that was revealed in the study. Shameless marketing plug there. So in the 2010 study, when it began with this group of agencies, Big I introduced for the first time a couple of additional statistics that had not been in there. And if you're familiar at all with the study, you know that Reagan Consulting Group is contracted to the Big I to do the Best Practices Study. From time to time, they are asked by the agents who participate to kind of come up with some new angles, new information that might be gleaned from those agencies. And one of the most exciting ones that I think has been added in the last few years was the idea of a statistic, a benchmark, if you will, that they could come up with to measure how much investment was being put into hiring of new producers. Now, obviously, if we're talking about organic growth, we have to have producers in order to go out and sell. So one of the things we're going to talk about this morning is the NUPP statistic. And it failed the acronym test, I guess, so what it really means is net investment in unvalidated producer pay, and it became the NUPP. And really that's a way to measure how much an agency is investing in hiring new producers compared with the amount of money those producers are producing today, how much revenue they're bringing in, if they were paid by the agency's normal commission schedule. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that, and we'll talk about the NUPP statistic. But that was an exciting new addition, I think, to the study to begin to talk about the need to hire new producers and how to evaluate whether or not you're on track relative to other agencies in doing that. Another one of the statistics we probably won't have time to go into a lot of depth on, but one of the statistics they added was in commercial lines and life and health, they added breakdown of accounts by commission size. That had been in the personal lines area, but they extended that to the life and health and to the commercial lines in this study. And also began to ask some very specific questions about how agencies were approaching the marketplace in terms of defining specialties or niches or any type of programs, for example, where they weren't trying to be generalists anymore. They were really trying to hone in on particular marketing paths for these new producers as well as for older producers and the agency in general. So that's given us some additional benchmarks to look at and talk about the sizes of those accounts and what specifically are those specialties and niches that they're operating in. I'm going to digress for a second to have you all, if you can, you either received probably in an email this week or you have available to you a very interesting study that was conducted about the future of independent agents. And one of the things that, it's a McKinsey study, one of the things that they very vocally pointed out was the need for specialization, that the idea of the generalist agent really is passé at this point, and I think we probably need to pay some attention to that. Another thing that came new in the study was some productivity benchmarks for CSRs, account managers, account executives. That will not be something that we're going to be talking about in this particular webinar. We will talk about that a little bit in the next one, the third in this series. And again, we're going to delve into all of these topics quite a bit more when we get to InsureFest. When asked this question in 2010, what are the biggest challenges facing you? They don't re-ask this question throughout the 3 years of the study, but when asked, and I don't think anything would have substantively changed in the process, to a person, everybody identified as their #1 challenge the talent recruitment, employee management, compensation, the issues that are related to the human assets that the agencies have. That was the topic of our very first webinar, Got Talent. It is a crucial issue. And if you're familiar with best practices, the way it works, they break all the agencies that participate are put into one of 6 revenue categories, from under 1.25 million as the small end to over 25 million in revenue at the high end. And I always find it very instructive that regardless the size of your organization, your challenges are the same. So in all 6 revenue categories, these were the biggest challenges that were identified. And second on the list to talent was this idea of organic growth, being able to produce it, being able to sustain it, being able to find the talent that's required in order to do it, and also as sort of an ancillary issue, we need organic growth in order to meet the carrier commitments that we have made, which have not gone away. If anything, those get ratcheted up a little bit every single year, as we know. We want to meet those commitments. And we had to keep all of this in context, which is we're trying to grow our agencies in a very weak economy, particularly those of us in California, and with a sustained soft marketplace for insurance. That, aside from a few lines of business, does not seem as though it is going to change significantly, at least in the short term. So we're faced with, really, we're calling this organic growth as a challenge, but really what we've got are 3 challenges all rolled into one. So we're going to tackle that one predominantly. And as you can see from the list, there were clearly other issues. Competition, increased competition, not just from other independent agents, but from direct writing insurance companies, continued encroachment into the personal lines market, expense management and profitability, a continuing challenge that's been in every study for the last 20 years. Interestingly, I think a little bit succession, perpetuation, leadership, which again, if we're going to be hiring new people and we're going to be putting them into producer roles, there is a possibility that we can tie those concepts together and use some of those people to perpetuate our organizations, and we have to do that. These are across all revenue categories, so you might think that once you got to the very high, over 25 million in revenue, succession and perpetuation and leadership wouldn't be an issue, but also identified as one. And last, certainly not least, also kind of tied together, government intervention and healthcare reform being cited by every category of revenue agency out there as one of their continuing challenges. So we give a lot of conversation to this idea of organic growth. We hear about it a lot. In the study, it's very specifically defined to be growth in your agency's revenue that you did not obtain through merger or acquisition activity. So true new business growth. That's really all we're talking about, and we have the opportunity to create new business and new revenue in a couple of ways. And if you embed this as part of your agency's strategy, we would encourage you to make sure you don't eliminate any of the possible sources of new revenue to the agency. Obviously, we're talking about new accounts that we bring into the agency that we did not have before, but not to the exclusion of additional revenue that we can get from our existing relationships. And kind of in terms of how you think about this, instead of thinking of revenue per account, it's a good idea to think about it as revenue per relationship. Have you been able to extract the maximum amount of revenue you can from each of the relationships that you have with your clients? That means we have cross-sold, and when we talk about cross-selling, that's not just if they had an auto policy, we sold them a homeowners. It's cross-selling interdepartmentally, from the personal lines to the commercial lines to employee benefits. Obviously, if you don't have those in your agency, you have a little limited opportunity there, but not cross-selling has been sort of the bane of the independent agent for a very long time. Really good intentions. We're going to cross-sell. I'm going to go in with this particular line of business, and I'm going to go back later, and I'm going to get it all. That's what we all say. That's our intention. When we go out and work with an agency, one of the benchmarks we use is when we run their book of business report, how many policies do they have per account or per relationship? And historically, as long as we have been doing this in independent agencies all over the country, that number doesn't seem to budge much above 2. And some of you might be kind of shocked to learn that. That's not to say that with your larger accounts that you write, you haven't done a magnificent job cross-selling those. Your policies per account at that level might be 10 or 15. And when I say per account, I mean really taking into account, do we have their personal insurance? Have we written their life insurance? All of those things, really looking at that. Once you get past your top tier accounts, that number starts to drop, and it drops precipitously until it gets down to 2 policies and 1 policy, basically monoline accounts that we've been writing. And we all know that the main reason to cross-sell is to improve retention. We're creating new revenue. That's a great reason, so we're producing organic growth, but even more importantly, the more policies we have for a client, the more likely we're going to retain that account. That data exists, and it's somewhat indisputable. The other potential for additional revenue is the whole account upgrading, not necessarily selling them another policy, but maybe selling them a better policy. And I think the biggest challenge that we face when we get to the cross-selling and account upgrading issues, everybody knows they should do it. There is not an agency out there, none of you listening have any confusion over this. You all know how important it is. You all know that it is a key to producing the organic growth and the higher retention. And I think the challenge becomes who's going to do it. So frequently in agencies we task the account managers, the CSRs, with the job of doing the cross-selling and the account upgrading. Unfortunately, they didn't take jobs as salespeople. They perceive that it is not necessarily their responsibility, and we come back with, hey, sales is everybody's job in this organization, but the reality is they sometimes lack the skills to do it, they lack the motivation to do it, they lack the training to do it. And so that's an issue that we've continued to struggle with. Before we beat ourselves up, I thought I would share with you some information from the Insurance Information Institute, III.org. If you ever want really great information about what's going on in the broader insurance industry, go there first, because likely they have it. We have gone through a period in our economy when premium has not grown. If you look at this in 2007, that was the first time we had negative written premium growth since 1943. So we had a pretty good 70-year run there, and then the bottom fell out. And needless to say, that is tied to the crash of the economy. So if you feel like you've been treading water for the last few years in your agency, it could be simply because we've been treading water as an economy in the last few years. Again, that's not to make an excuse for it. That's not to say it's okay to go 5 years without a spectacular, uptick in organic growth. It's just to say it is what it is, and premiums were falling, and we had not so many opportunities. Soft market, weak economy, all kind of conspiring together to produce less than stellar organic growth results. When they looked at the best practices study, they did go through the sources, the individual sources of organic growth. They are not all created equal, and there has been some movement over time. I think it is obvious that commercial lines and bonds, because of the condition of the construction market, were two of the areas where growth was not only non-existent, it was going backwards. Thankfully, most of our agencies also have personal lines. That was what sustained us during the kind of dark times in commercial lines, so there's been pretty good growth, organic growth on the personal lines side of the business. Not so much on value-added services. That's something that we've struggled with and continue to struggle with. Group medical, other group insurance actually also fell off along with commercial and bonds. We encouraged people to set up employee benefit practices within their firm. That did not seem to provide that offset to the shrinkage that happened in the commercial and bond market. Individual life and health, believe it or not, spectacular growth. We have several agents that when they saw what was happening in commercial lines, they had never made much of a dedicated push. They had licenses, they had some life insurance and individual health insurance on the books, but they didn't have a lot of it. They focused on that. They looped back to their existing book of business and focused on something that, when we get P&C oriented, that was money that they had sort of left on the table, issues they hadn't really explored with their clients. And that was an area of very good organic growth over the last few years. So in the study, they asked then the follow-up question after they say, what's a challenge? They asked these agencies to identify what would be the keys. If organic growth is your biggest issue or your second biggest issue, how do you solve that? Again, everybody says easily cross-selling, account rounding, account upgrading, account development. One executive cited the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's easy to get that we haven't done, the home to the auto and vice versa, the package to the workers' comp to the umbrella in commercial lines, whatever that happens to be. And then kind of that bigger issue, multidisciplinary. Did we make a referral from the property casualty side over to our life and health or employee benefit side? Aggressively seeking referrals, both from our client base and from centers of influence. You would think this goes without saying. I ask for a referral every time I'm engaged in a client relationship. It simply doesn't happen. When you ask people why they don't get more referrals and they're being honest, they always have to say, because we didn't ask. That's a process. It's a discipline. It has to be done. It's not negotiable, and yet it's not being done. It's very simple. And as we go through these, by the way, you're going to look at some of these and you're going to say, well, I know that, I know that, I know that. It's how to do it. I'm going to save how to do it for InsureFest. You have to show up there and then I'll tell you the answer. Expanding the marketing efforts. There is another track of webinars, and there's going to be a lot of information at InsureFest about the use of social media, how to get better use out of your website, how to make it more interactive, really use the technology tools that are out there in order to create the organic growth. We know it will not happen passively. We know that if there ever was a day when you could sit in your office and wait for the phone to ring, that's not going to get the job done anymore. Develop more niches, specialties, target markets, practice groups. This was a big one, and that hadn't been in past studies, and I think that's really a key to the change and the evolution that independent agents have experienced or need to experience. It is very, very difficult to be the master of every concept in insurance, and we do a lot of our work with brand new producers. In fact, that's why I'm in New Jersey, and one of the things that we have found to really help producers be successful is to point them, steer them in specific directions. Maybe not just one, but if we can get them up and running and becoming expert in particular industries early on in their career, they do much better, and particularly when it's an industry in which they have some background. So we're getting a lot of people, for example, that have come out of the mortgage industry or the banking industry, or people who came out of payroll service. Some of the industries that were impacted, particularly in the economy, we're taking that expertise and kind of pointing them back into that industry and saying, look, you have a working knowledge, you have a vocabulary, you understand the issues in that particular industry, focus on that. Focus on it and now become an expert in the insurance issues that are relevant in that particular industry. And I've got a couple of quotes from some of the participants in the best practices study that speak to that, but we're huge believers in this, and also huge believers that this solves that other problem that was cited along with organic growth, which was meeting carrier commitments. Carriers typically are organized in these specialty target market areas, and that helps not only the producer, the new producer, or the experienced producer, but also helps us meet those company commitments, because we're not going after target markets for which it's going to be a difficult submission or placement process on the other end. Nurturing and leveraging our existing accounts, having service delivered by knowledgeable staff, and focusing on retention as well. Again, the idea there of getting that maximum revenue per relationship out of it is going to lead us to higher retention. And some of you might think there's kind of no limit to your retention. You know, how high should it be? Well, it should be 100%. I should retain every account. Be careful when you measure retention. For one thing, if you measured it in revenue dollars over the last few years, that might be a kind of ugly number, because revenue might have been going the opposite direction. Really focusing on the relationship side. How many relationships did I retain over the last few years? I believe there is such a thing as too high of retention. I think it directly impacts organic growth. When we get to the point in an individual producer's life, their book of business, or an agency's life, where everything is turned inwardly and we're focused on the existing relationships, not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, we tend to become service organizations, not so much sales organizations. I've got a piece of data I'm going to show you from the study that I believe backs that up. Producer accountability, incentive compensation, motivating them to reach their sales goals. There's also some data in there about producers who do and do not meet their sales goals. Holding them accountable, expecting that they will produce the result, that they will do, in fact, the job that they've been hired to do. If you're a hired salesperson, you should be engaged in sales activity, and be hitting those targets every year, assuming that we haven't set the target too high. So obviously the sales goals have to be realistic and attainable, all those things we've talked about. This is a quote from one of the executives that participated. Said, "We've come to believe in specialization. Every producer needs to pick a lane to swim in." I thought that was a great way to put it. By doing so, they can produce more business and better serve their customers. I believe it also allows the agency to better serve the customers. Now what happens as a natural outgrowth of this is that your service staff becomes expert in those industries as well. And they do understand the day-to-day issues a little bit better. They therefore understand the insurance issues in those target areas better as well. Many disagree, but I think the day of the generalist insurance agent has largely come and gone. Our young guys, and I hope gals, really buy into this, and their success validates this. Our generalists simply face too much great competition. In other words, we're out there beating the bushes for the same accounts over and over and over again, and we're all pretty good at doing that. Once I become established as an expert, I have a little bit more of a free run on the field here. It's not quite as littered with my competitors. It was interesting that this quote, which came out of the best practices study, very nearly mirrored that McKinsey study that just came out. And that's exactly what they were talking about, was this idea of generalization giving way to specialization. Some of the other keys to organic growth, I was entertained by this one. Improve carrier commissions. Like that's going to happen. Okay, so don't count on that one, all right? Don't pin your hopes on, I know how we're going to create more revenue. The companies are all going to come along, and when they deliver our schedule the next time around in our new contract, they're going to up all of our commission. No, but maybe as an adjunct to that, making sure we're maximizing that profit sharing and contingency would be something where an agent very directly can control that. We're not going to control their giving us that level of front-end commission necessarily, but obviously an important part of organic growth on the backside. Being able to add those value-added services, as I said earlier, that's something we have struggled with as an industry. What exactly will those services be? At the high revenue categories, you get a lot more of the value-added services. Smaller agencies aren't necessarily able to do that. They have to focus on the core business, which is the sale of insurance products, and I think there will continue to be that kind of disparity between the two. Leveraging our service capabilities. What that means is we have to make sure our internal house is in order so that we can grow the new revenue and not have to add to staff as quickly or at the same percentage that we're adding the new revenue. That is a crucial issue. I can have all the best producers in the world who are going out and doing a great job of dragging new business in the door, but if I lack the capacity to assimilate that business in my agency, I'm going to have a problem. So the one has to follow the other in pretty close order. They cited using technology to manage the producer pipelines. Agency management systems are designed once we have agreed to work on somebody's insurance. They don't help a producer necessarily manage their prospects and their prospect database. That's obviously a key to getting the job done for the organic growth. Investment in new producers, their development, their training. The idea that you can send a new producer, brand new to the business, away to a school for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and have them come back and unsupervised, unmanaged, and unmentored produce the kind of result you're looking for is incredibly naive. So it's going to have to be an ongoing investment, and it's going to have to be ongoing support within the agency in order for them to be able to do it. And seminar selling to the clients is what they were talking about there as a way to create organic growth. In the study, as I said, these are the 6 revenue categories, and I don't want to depress anybody this early in the morning, but if you look at these numbers, these are the organic growth numbers. It sort of speaks to the fact that once you grow an agency to a certain point, you get some critical mass going, and it tends to drag the number up. So it was difficult for the agencies less than $2.5 million in revenue to have large amounts of organic growth. Not a bad number at the 5.6% end of the study, but think about what we're talking about. These are best of the best, cream of the crop, top guns of our industry here, and yet those numbers really aren't very large. The reality of the situation is the industry itself organically only grew about 2%. So there wasn't, we've got the high and the low here, and we're pretty much right at the average. So individual agencies, when you translated that down, that meant there just wasn't a lot of growth going on. So I like to look at the data and best practices and see if I can tie two pieces of information together. So at the top you see the organic growth number in terms of percentage. At the bottom they asked in every category, how do producers spend their time? How do the paid salespeople in our organizations spend their time? You might like to think that if you're a salesperson, you spend the majority of your time in new business activity. And yet, in every single category, all 6, the majority of a producer's time was identified as having been spent in service-related activities. If we don't change this pie chart, we don't have much hope of being able to create and sustain the organic growth that we need. There's a balance here. And I think what this is reflective of is us becoming service organizations first and sales organizations second. And that's a trend that we're going to have to reverse. Said we talk about this NUPP statistic. Again, this is how it is created. It's a percentage of your net revenue that is invested in new producers. And a NUPP of 1.5% of net revenue is what is considered to be a healthy level of investment. This, I think, is really an interesting statistic, because while you might think, as we looked at the organic growth, it was much higher at the high-end agencies, when you get to the NUPP, it totally reverses. The smaller agencies are actually making a higher percentage investment in new producers than the larger agencies. And again, the reason Reagan converts this to a percentage is because the pure dollars are really irrelevant. It's how much are you directly putting back into your business for the purposes of hiring on new talented salespeople who are going to get you that organic growth. So bigger isn't always better, and I think the numbers bear that out. More investment needed. A sad statistic. The best number there was in all 6 revenue categories. 62.5% of producers that had hired over the last 5 years had actually met their sales goals. Not quite 2/3, right? 1/3 are failing at meeting their sales goals. That's the high number. The lowest number in the revenue categories was around 42%, so less than half of the producers that had been hired in 5 years had met their sales goals. I will enjoy talking about this at InsureFest and how to get past this particular number. One thing that you should think about is that's not a good result. That's not anything for us to be proud of. It means that we're doing probably a couple of things wrong. We're not holding them accountable for the result, and maybe we're hanging on to them too long when we continue to know after 5 years that they have failed to reach their sales goals and objectives in each of those 5 years. Most agency owners would tell you one of the biggest mistakes they ever make is hanging on to people too long after they already know they don't have what it takes to do the job they've been hired for. So again, 62.5% is in one group. Most of them were in the 40s and the 50s, and our experience really tells us that that's anecdotally at least true. We do so much work with new producers, and I would say if we look at that 5-year point out there, more than 50% of the brand new producers that are hired into the business are no longer in the business. And when I say in the business, I mean they're not in the insurance business anymore. They haven't received what they needed, and they've maybe gone on to, what they perceive to be greener pastures, which is very unfortunate because they just missed out on an opportunity to do really meaningful work and make a great deal of money doing it. So I think, again, that's a statistic we're going to need to focus on and keep track of, and then figure out how are we going to turn that into a number that's more like 75 or 80% success in our agencies. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Cheryl. Again, this is all great information. I think, as we all know, growth is probably the biggest thing we all sit back and think about constantly, because without that, we definitely aren't moving forward in the industry. And that last statistic is a bit depressing, I have to admit, but I think we're on the right track, like you said. And everyone who's taking part in these calls certainly understands the value, and that's why they're in on these calls. So thank you once again. I'd like to now open the webinar for any questions you might have. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and submit those questions through the right-hand navigation area of the GoToMeeting section. Again, we'll go ahead and get those, put them in there, and we'll ask them of Cheryl. And keep in mind, too, if you go ahead and if you've got questions that come to you later on, feel free to email us, and we'll get those to Cheryl as well. First question I'm looking at here is regarding the point of account upgrading versus cross-selling. If you could give some examples of account upgrading that you have.
Absolutely. So let's think about a personal lines client. Let's assume they've already been cross-sold. We have as many policies as they're going to purchase, but when I look at the individual policies, they have a homeowner's policy with us. Account upgrading means I've looked at the available endorsements and I've talked to them about things. We added a jewelry schedule. We put replacement cost on their contents of their home. Those enhancements that are available. Certainly in commercial lines, we're pretty good about going back with recommendations every year, but our recommendations tend to lean toward sell them another policy. And you know how that goes. You can only go so far with that discussion, and their eyes roll back in their head, and they know that you're just here to lift some more money out of their wallet. Focus on the policies that you already write for them. Have you provided all of the enhancements and endorsements and coverages that are appropriate for this particular client? We're not selling anybody anything they don't need, but we're upgrading the coverage that they've got. In some cases we can do that. We can kind of roll on certain things. It depends on what they are, but just really improve the policies they're already buying as opposed to selling them a new policy.
So then would you recommend highlighting maybe the coverage enhancements they're already paying for, I guess would be a way to do it as well then?
Yes. And again, I think you have to do that as a discipline, and you can't. There are thousands of enhancements, we all know that, especially when you get into commercial lines. But if I looked at my different books of business there and said, for the next year, we're going to choose 3. There are 3 things that we believe we haven't done a good enough job discussing with our clients and making sure they understand how important that is as an improvement to their insurance program. Just focus on those and see if you can make some strides in that area. If you try to do that on a one-off kind of basis individually, it's going to be very difficult to do.
Got it. The next question here is a good one. This is one that comes up often, I know, in meetings I'm always a part of. They want to know your thoughts on performance-based compensation for the backroom staff. I imagine that's a reference to maybe administrative account managers and things of that nature.
It absolutely is. It's another one of those things we have struggled with as a business. Really easy to compensate the salespeople. Really easy to see the revenue that they create. Always has been at issue for the service staff, for the account managers and CSRs. It really does need to be performance-based. It really does need to be compensation that's tied to a number of factors. How big of a book of business do they handle? How many clients do they handle? What is their opportunity for doing some of the cross-selling and account rounding? It really does need to be things that the support staff can control. Too often what happens is they feel like they're tied to the production staff, and if that producer isn't out writing a lot of new business and growing organically, their pay is limited. They're capped. So coming up with those benchmarks for the service staff, that's critical to keeping them appropriately motivated. We want to get people who understand that the size of book of business that they handle, the revenue that is under their control, if they can take on more revenue and not let the service standards of the agency slip, they're going to get more money. They're more valuable to us. And so making sure that you do those kinds of performance-based things that allow them to really feel that they exercise some control over what their final paycheck is going to be. I think that's all crucial. It is more easily said than done. However, you have to be very thoughtful in that. You have to have them really participate, and it can't just be an amount of money, a flat amount of money that they are going to earn whether they do a good job or bad job, handle a lot of accounts or a few accounts.
Got it, got it. Another question here regarding the talent portions you spoke about briefly in the beginning. It's how can we as an association help to encourage more young talent in the industry as a whole?
Get the message out. We're not doing a very good job. Any opportunity that you have to get out and talk to a group of high school students, a group of college students about the opportunities that are available in this business, we need to take advantage of those opportunities every single time we can. Young people are not naturally attracted to our business. We know it. We know it's kind of a sex appeal issue. They're looking for more exciting things or things they perceive to be more exciting. Well, frankly, I think the insurance business is a hoot. I can't imagine working in a business where you are, less gratified than you can be in insurance. It's up to every one of us to get out there and start delivering the message. And that's for carriers, that's for agencies, that's not just to look for salespeople. That's just to look for talented individuals that want a fulfilling, challenging career, not a job. Because as we like to say, as a job, insurance sucks, but it's a fabulous career.
Very good point. The next question is regarding the organic growth numbers, and this person writes, do the organic growth numbers differ much between personal lines and commercial lines? We're at 95% commercial lines, and we're curious if personal lines are more profitable. It always seemed like a lot of work for very little revenue.
That's a great question. The data suggests that the organic growth has been personal lines oriented. It has been negative in commercial lines. Again, that's just that combination of weak economy, lower payrolls, lower sales, etc., and soft pricing in the marketplace. Interestingly, most agencies are like that, 95-5, 90-10 commercial personal split, and yet when you look at the profitability of those individual books of business, in most agencies the personal lines is far more profitable. It's not the leader in terms of the total revenue, and I think that's why it is not exactly something an agency actively pursues. Had it not been for personal lines, however big that slice of your pie is over the last few years, we would have had agencies watching their revenue numbers go down 12 to 15%. It was personal lines that sustained a lot of agencies. So the growth, the data very much reflects that the growth was in personal lines, and as I said, the individual life and health, that was kind of a wild card that was out there that nobody saw coming. That's where it came from.
Good. The next question here is a general question about outsourcing, maybe your thoughts on outsourcing. They specifically referenced WAVE, which is the outsourcing for the people that help you out in the different departments within your agency.
Okay, this is a touchy one, so please try not to take offense out there. You asked. I'm genetically predisposed to give you a truthful answer. I think WAVE is a great idea. Work-at-home vintage employees is the WAVE model. It's being supported by the Big I. Take retirees and who are very much capable of doing work, letting them stay at home, and outsourcing work to them. I am all for that. I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't know of a lot of agencies who are taking advantage of that, and my impression has been that there may be a cost-benefit issue with it. I don't know that for a fact. I think it's certainly worth looking into. The outsourcing, the offshoring, of service work is not something that I would recommend an agency look into unless they have really deeply considered all of the ramifications of it. The agencies that I know that are using it, and that's offshored to India, to China, firms that are really trying to do a good job, but again, there's a lot, the error rate is very high. The work comes back to the account managers in the agency, often has to be redone. And even though it's cheap, and clearly we know the issue here is that you can offshore that job for significantly less than you're going to pay a U.S.-based employee to perform the same work. You have to look at total cost. And if you've got people reworking things, you probably just spent more money than you would have if you'd had it done internally. I know the issue here. A lot of the issue is backlog. Chronic backlog, the inability to move things out the door, and so there's a temptation to go into these outsourcing arrangements. Do it carefully, buyer beware, and if you want more information about how to solve that problem without the need to send it offshore, that's something that certainly I'd love to discuss with any of you. I'd just say do it carefully. The results have not been great.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to our next point, and that's, we've got some great questions that have come in and some conversations that certainly sound like they could be taken when we all meet in InsureFest out in October at Rancho Las Palmas. So definitely want to keep the conversations going and this line of communications open. So that's great. If anyone has any questions we didn't get a chance to get through today, please go ahead and email us or definitely join us at InsureFest. Before we get to InsureFest, I'd like to first thank Cheryl and spending time with us again today. Really appreciate it, and I hope you're going to join us for our third in this series. The next one's called Got Plans, and again, it's free to all IIABCal members, and that's going to be on September 19th. And to register for that webinar or to download the recorded version of today's webinar, visit us at www.insurefest.org. That's www.insurefest.org, and click on the InsureFest Agency Management Track Web Series link. And in addition, like I said, Cheryl will be joining us at this year's InsureFest, which is going to be from October 24th through the 26th at the Las Palmas Resort and Spa in Rancho Mirage. And for more information, you can go to that same website and click on the InsureFest link. And finally, a reminder for you to register for not only Cheryl's next series, but we've also got the final agency sales track webinar that's going to be presented by IIABCal, and that's on August 6th. So we got a lot coming at you. Go ahead and check out our website for all the information and to register for those webinars. And once again, I really want to say thank you to Cheryl, and you all have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.